that story is incredible. Yeah, I mean, it really highlights, I think, more than even marketing a through line, I feel like it highlights this kind of the perspective of what can help the most right now. And so I think leading all the way into kind of dynamic yield, and you started to mention personalization. And so maybe let's take like a broad perspective and just really go over what personalization is and how that can help companies in general.
Sure, that's a good point, because a lot of people don't know what personalization is. In fact, I find, especially in Japan, when I talk about personalization, they say, oh, so you power those ads. Like when I click on a pair of shoes, then I see ads for shoes all day long on Facebook. And yes, to a certain degree, retargeting of ads based on products that you've looked at, that is a small part of personalization. That's like maybe 5% of what dynamic yield does. But personalization is much more about, the pioneers in this field are actually Amazon and Netflix and companies like Stitch Fix, which is a fashion retailer which sends you personalized clothing each month, a box of clothing. So it's about reproducing the experience of going into a store that you've maybe shopped at for years, where the staff know everything about what you like. Like if you walk into that old, mom and pop store off of Main Street, the old-fashioned version of this, Mr. Smith would say, "Oh, how are you doing, Brian? Hey, I heard that your daughter is turning 2 soon, and you're going to have a party, and I heard from Mrs. Mayberry down the street that your wife is interested in gardening right now or something. Here are some products for you." And so that's based on knowing you as a customer and knowing personally exactly what you're interested in, what's going on in your life, and what products you would like. Now, personalization in the digital world basically takes that experience, it removes all of the personally identifiable aspects of that, and it puts you into an audience segment. So in the digital world, you walk into the store, we don't know that you're Brian, but we do know that you're in the male demographic, we know your age range, we know more or less whether you're single or a family person. We can track data that identifies what type of an audience member you are, what your general interests are likely to be, and then we can recommend products based in the same way. With dynamic yield, we do that across multiple channels. On the website or on the mobile experience, we'll say, okay, you're part of this audience segment, and so we're going to change the look and feel of this website to focus on these colors. We're going to add some content into the website pages that are relevant for you. We're going to take some content out because it's not relevant for you. We're not even going to show those sections of the website. And we're going to really make this relevant to you. So we're going to show you just the user experience, the UI, the user interface that's relevant for you. And that, it's simply speaking, it's just altering the code so that we're removing like navigational elements that don't matter to you. You go to a website and maybe you like everything about a certain brand, but if the shop sells multiple different brands, we don't need to show you those other brands. Certainly not if they're competitors. So we can remove navigational links to those, we can remove banners, and we can remove products that are not interesting to you, and we can replace them, target products that are most likely going to be of interest to you. So we have recommendation strategies and machine learning that will cycle through the product category and say, this size and fit and color, this is going to look good for, not for Brian, but for this audience segment that Brian is a part of. So technically speaking, at a high level, we do that on the website or in the app, and then increasingly even offline in non-traditional channels. For example, we can do that at a touch panel where you're ordering menu items. In Japan, recently we have ramen shops and stuff where you order by putting your sen-yen into the machine, and then you order your ramen and your options off of a touch panel. So we can do that at the fast food level. We can do in-store kiosk personalization of signage by identifying what audience segment you're a part of, and then changing the signage around you in the store to fit your segment, or even on voice assistants like Alexa, and probably in the near future, while your car autopilot is driving for you, we can power the personalized recommendations for what music you're going to listen to next in the car, and maybe you can even do a little shopping on your car's dashboard while your autopilot is driving for you. So we're not too far away from this Internet of Things where everything is connected, and personalization, recommendations, and cross-sell could even be happening on your refrigerator's panel in your house.
That's amazing. I actually didn't realize how deep that personalization was. I think that when we first kind of had our conversations around dynamic yield, I was definitely thinking of it in terms of like marketing or MarTech or ad tech, but it sounds like that you guys have a very wide perspective on the future. I feel like.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because we have multiple digital channels in terms of the customer experience, but then there's the ability to personalize emails and advertising. So like that example of ad retargeting, sometimes it's a little bit annoying. That ad retargeting, there's the right way to do it, there's the wrong way to do it.
There's a line.
Yeah, there's a line. The wrong way to do it is if you buy a pair of shoes and then get retargeted with the same pair of shoes for 2 weeks.
You don't want them the same shoe.
Yeah,
you got a mattress. Why not get the same mattress?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. You just bought this house. Here's exactly the same house. Would you like to buy this again? So we can improve on that, and with dynamic yield, we do that by showing recommendations for complementary items or similar items. So in that shoe example, it would be, well, you really liked those shoes. Here's some in a slightly different pattern and color, or here's some that are more sport oriented or more work oriented, or maybe you just bought the house. Here's a washer dryer that would fit right in there. There's multiple applications of recommendations, and then like personalized content and understanding, again, your audience segment fits into this certain criteria. So the ad should be using these colors and these fonts and these design elements that are likely to speak well to that audience segment. So yes, it is very wide ranging. One of the most important things about it all, though, is that it's so easy to set up, and much of it is powered by algorithms and the AI, so that a single person can run these entire campaigns across these channels. For full information on that, visit the website, dynamicyield.com. We're launching a Japanese version of that website very soon, this quarter. So, to better answer the question about why this is interesting for the Japanese market, I think it's important to sort of focus on what I've been trying to relate throughout this whole story is that you need to find something that's going to be solving a pain point in Japan. Japan is not really a market where you try to come in and disrupt things. Japan is more a market where you come in and you look where things have been harmonious for so long that the harmony is starting to cause a risk. Like, the ship has been running really well for so long. Everything is just running perfectly. It's been holding a great course, and the old steam engine is turning the propeller along. Everything's working really well. But it's headed straight into a typhoon, and nobody knows it, right? You've got like this train is running perfectly, but it's headed off a cliff. So you have to look for these areas where there's a risk coming, but people haven't really identified it yet, because the only thing that moves business in Japan is what in sales we call away positioning. basically you have towards positioning in sales and you have away positioning. So in a towards position, you move towards something like an increase in revenue or an increase in your market share or some opportunity. And so you would talk, in the sales narrative, you would talk about all of these cool things that you could have if you move towards this. In Japan, that doesn't usually work. What works is away positioning. You establish pain, risk, that cliff that you're about to fall off or that typhoon that you're about to run into, and you say, let's move away from that. That's unpleasant. Let's maintain the harmony by doing a course shift in this direction over here because this is safe. And one reason why it's so important to do that is, first of all, as we discussed earlier, harmony in business is paramount because harmony is one of the core ethics of the society. Everything is established in Japanese society to allow a large population to live harmoniously on a small series of islands, and business is the same. But there's also a core tenet of Japanese management where there's a great deal of strength in the group. And having the group work well together is considered the most efficient, like the smartest way to do business. It is a core tenet of Japanese business philosophy that the group is always smarter than any one individual. So, you can have an absolute genius, Einstein, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, whatever it is, that person is never going to be smarter than the group, the combined intelligence. What you want to do is get a bunch of Elon Musks together into a group and have them work harmoniously, which I think works really well in the industrial age when you're working at a pace where you have time to get group consensus. But it doesn't work well now in the information age because the speed of business is much faster. By the time you've reached group consensus on something in today's business world, everything has changed and that consensus doesn't matter anymore. Especially in like the digital world, for example, where a year ago I would have advised any client to focus on advertising on Instagram and trying to get organic reach. And today there is no organic reach on Instagram. It is pay to play completely. 6 months ago, I probably would have said, okay, stop, Instagram, shift everything over to TikTok. And then as of, the recent decisions around privacy concerns on that platform, that's shifting again. And maybe over the next few months, YouTube would be a better place to put your promotional efforts. So it's constantly changing. In the past 2 years, those platforms have gone through multiple shifts. But for most Japanese companies who work on this consensus-based model, they're still back 2 years ago saying, we should really look at Instagram.
Just Facebook.
Facebook, yeah. And they're too late for that already. Yeah. But they don't know that, and they don't have that ability to keep pace that quickly because there's never been a need for that until now. We're in this digital world where things just move much more fast. So now there's a risk because they're not moving quickly enough. And so what we need to do is come in and find more efficient ways to make do the same group consensus building, but do it much faster. And find ways to make that whole process more efficient so that there is not just maintaining the current productivity, but you actually have to increase productivity with a declining GDP, or a declining population like we have right now in order to maintain the GDP. So it's absolutely essential. We have a critical mission in selling this type of technology because in many ways it's literally, this will save Japan.
Yeah, I definitely can see where you're coming from there. And it's part of what you were talking about, I think, comes to this idea of risk appetite and sort of tolerance of failure. And I feel like in my experience, I've seen that Japan can be pretty risk averse. Do you feel like with a tool like dynamic yield, you're helping solve those issues, or what are some of the ways you guys are working around that and helping them adjust and maybe become more tolerant of failure?
Yeah, absolutely. The inherent value of a tool like dynamic yield is that you're going through the Kaizen process. So Kaizen is the Japanese word for an iterative process where you're taking small steps and then testing whether that works or not. But you're trying to accelerate the process so that you can go through multiple iterations quite quickly so that you're still making progress. At its core, the type of technology that I had sold for the past several years and that led up to selling dynamic yield was this A/B testing, basically a process of saying, we don't know whether we should use this image for the campaign or this image. We don't know if we should try this new website design or this new design. We don't even know if people are going to click more on the red button or the green button, right? So let's test it. And the traditional, methodology there would have been to get a group together, get everybody's opinion, find consensus, and then say, okay, red button it is. And then you're set on that course of using like the red button or that image or that website design, and you can't change it very easily because you had to go through that group consensus building. But using a tool that says, here's the A version of this, here's the red button and the green button. Let's try both of them together, just to a small percentage of the audience, and we'll test it. We'll find out what actually works. And we'll back it up with statistical modeling so that we know with confidence which actually works. And then we can go to the group and say, yeah, contrary to our intuition, it's actually the green button. Or people actually responded better to this website UI, or they actually liked this campaign better. And here's the data to back it up. Now let's keep proving it, and we'll run some more iterations, and we'll keep constantly making sure that we're going in the right direction. So it's just a way to navigate the business more effectively. To use that same sort of ship analogy, in the old days, it would be like using the old navigational equipment to get a star sight and say, here's our compass heading, we're gonna head this direction, keep the ship on this course. And we're just gonna go on that course. And an excellent navigator and a full crew could keep the ship on course and you'd get to your destination, but there would be risk of going off course and you'd have to make adjustments, and it was a very manual, time-consuming process, and that's basically how businesses are still run now in Japan. You set the course and you just go with it. But constant iterative testing is much more like having a modern GPS that constantly updates your position. It's basically not just saying we're going to go in this direction, it's also literally drawing a path which is constantly updated because we tested this direction, the A version, and it didn't work, so we're setting the course back over here, and now we're setting the course over here. So every business process, every decision you make is drawing a clear path towards your goal and making sure that you're on path. And of course, in business, we call those KPIs, and we set the KPIs, and then we test against them to make sure that we're on path. Once you have a good testing tool and a good testing methodology and the know-how internally to be able to set that course and know that you're on track, then you can start to pick up speed, and you can move much more quickly than you could in the old method where you're waiting for the stars to come out again so you could take another star sight and see if you were even 30 miles within your original course or not. So in the business world, it absolutely solves this problem. It allows Japanese businesses to go through their decision-making process much more quickly. And now with the addition of AI and machine learning, you can actually do that at the speed of basically super computer computing, because the algorithms are constantly running and even making predictions about where you're going to be if you keep on this course. And that's actually one of the functions of dynamic yield, is predictive targeting. It says if we keep testing in this way, these audience segments are going to continue to react well to these products and this line of products and the recommendations that we can do. We can say this with statistical significance, and so we can speed up in this direction. It's going to be correct. So that's exciting because now you can move quicker in the correct direction with confidence with fewer people.
That's great. And kind of continuing down that train of thought, we've talked about this idea of like the perfect product and how it's really prevalent in Japan, and how there's a hesitation to release anything before it gets to that level. Whereas in the West, it's more about putting it out and then fixing it along the way. Yeah. How do you kind of balance those two things in working with a product like dynamic yield in a market like Japan?
Yeah, so part of that comes from Japan's rich history of craftsmanship. If you look at, a kimono, for example, it's perfect, it's exquisite. And to make a kimono, it starts with how to properly raise silkworms, and then this incredibly long process, or how to correctly forge a beautiful samurai sword, or something like that, or how to take the concept of the automobile and miniaturize it and make it more and more efficient until it's something that's practical enough to keep going into the 21st century. That is like the epitome of Japanese craftsmanship, and this mastery of tangible items and processes applied to making tangible items. And that entire business model is around, let's get it as perfect as we can before we release it to the market, and then we'll get market feedback, and to keep it fresh, we'll add a little bit to it. Maybe we'll change a little bit, we'll change the color, or this slightly change it, slight iteration, and we'll keep slightly iterating it in this Kaizen process to make sure we are making some progress and the market is still responding well. But today's world is very different because it's moved into this intangible world where so much of our work and our life is now in the digital sphere. And it's because of the whole COVID-19 phenomenon that we're going through right now. Almost everybody's work now is touched by digital in some way. You're having to remote work or telework, or you're having to change your work processes in some way. My workflow at Dynamic Yield is almost like 90% online now. And it probably always could have been, but now it makes sense for it to be. But to really get good at that, there's a huge mind shift that's necessary. And I think it's very difficult for the Japanese market to go from that comfortable world of tangibles into the intangibles. I think it's difficult because it's never perfect. It's so sort of amorphous and like this sort of cloud concept. Like, what exactly is software? You can't actually touch every aspect of it. You're just looking at lines and lines of code, essentially. And maybe you didn't build the thing, you just built one part of it, and then you don't really understand how the other components of it work. How can you perfect it if you can't fully touch and feel and grasp it? So I think what's necessary is to maintain the Japanese desire for perfection and the very high level of service and like white glove service, but apply it to this world of intangibles, and then have a shift in customers' expectations. Say, the one thing, the software itself may not be perfect. In fact, we cannot get it perfect. We can get it about maybe 90% perfect, but by its very nature, there are always going to be some parts in flux. There are going to be some patches that we need to do. There are going to be some bugs that come up, and we'll fix that in the next iteration. What we can do, though, because we can't make the product 100% perfect, what we can do is provide you with very good services around it and support, so that if you have any issues, we'll bring in a human component to help fix that in the interim, and we'll do our best to speed up the product delivery cycle so that the next version will fix that set of errors, and you'll have a new set of errors. Yeah. But if we can, shift people's expectations of what is perfection from, it's going to be a perfect car, to it's going to be a near perfect experience, yeah, then I think it's okay. Like, imagine, apply this to the old world of tangible items, like a car, for example. Let's say that in this analogy, you purchase a car, a Japanese car, you would expect it to run for 200,000 kilometers without much maintenance. And if it broke down, you'd get excellent service from Toyota or wherever. But you would expect the car to go a long way without breaking down. Let's say that in the new world, you just have to live with the fact that the car is going to break down constantly, but it's almost as if the support technicians are following behind you in another car, and every time it breaks down, they're going to be like, okay, yep, move your stuff over here and we'll drive you for a while. Okay, now your car's fixed, we'll shift you back over here. If you can make that really smooth and pleasant in some way, then you get closer to the overall experience that the Japanese market requires. And obviously in the digital world, it's not the same massive interruption. If you get a minor bug in your software, you're still able to continue with your work. So we have to get used to this new world of rapid iteration, rapid change, and more intangibles.
Yeah. And in software, it's a little bit more seamless, right? Like it's smoothed over a bit. And so kind of going back to personalization as a concept, in Japan, where have you seen maybe the strongest interest? And then the second part of that, like where do you feel like it's lacking the most? And then the direction you kind of want to be going into.
Well, the interest is in solving the acute pain point that we have right now, because in these past few months, as the coronavirus has disrupted all of work, all of Japan's main street retailers have had to shutter their brick and mortar stores or seriously reduce the amount of staff presence and the number of stores that they have and shift everything to e-commerce. The pain is that they've seen a decline in revenue if they were still entirely stuck in brick and mortar. The benefit, the actual beneficiary of the whole coronavirus thing is that e-commerce is spiking. So we've seen all of our customers increase, their traffic has increased threefold or more to their websites, and for many of them their revenue has kept pace. So it's a huge opportunity actually to move into e-commerce. There was a very interesting McKinsey report that came out about 2 weeks ago in the USA that showed the trajectory of the evolution of e-commerce adoption in the States. And in the past 3 months, what would have been another 10 years of growth was condensed into just 3 months. So essentially, the United States e-commerce maturity and adoption jumped forward this huge, quantum leap. Japan has seen a similar jump. It's much more slow and much more gradual because there are so many bottlenecks. There are not enough staff who can manage e-commerce experiences. There are not enough websites. There is still a lot of fragmentation within the basic like CMS, website infrastructure, server hosting, and all of this. There needs to be more consolidation and efficiency in that side of things. But for personalization, the absolute acute need right now is to improve the customer experience in e-commerce. In fact, I think it's probably the largest business opportunity that I've seen in the almost 20 years I've been in Japan. If you're not in e-commerce right now, you definitely should be. In fact, I'm kind of looking at launching a little side project based on a personal hobby that will take advantage of this e-commerce boom that's going on right now. So any business that has the ability to move their sales into the digital realm absolutely must do that right now. They can do that much more efficiently by using the AI and the automation capabilities of a platform like Dynamic Yield. Now, the sort of negative aspects of that, obviously there isn't the know-how to be able to do that right now, and so we're working really hard to train and educate the market and build out our ecosystem of partners who can help to service and support the software. Using that same analogy, the software solves a lot of problems. In our case, I'm not going to say that our software isn't perfect because I think our product team does a great job and it is nearly perfect. We actually have very, very few bugs and issues with the platform, and we have a very fast release cycle that fixes them. So after selling a lot of our marketing technology over the years, this is one product that I really don't see a lot of issues with. But at the same time, we have an excellent service and support team and partner network that's providing that white glove level of service and support in the Japanese market, in Japanese, to the level of expectation of this market. So that's slowly solving that pain point. But the number one thing is just education. And it's difficult to solve that education problem in a market like Japan, where the majority of the working population is getting into their 50s now. The median age of the population is 48, and I think the median worker age is 55 or something like that, right? Yeah. So if you're 55 and 10 years away from retirement, you're actually at a point in your career where you have to start back from zero to learn all your processes in a digital world right now, which is not very attractive. It's pretty painful. So we need to solve that problem as well.
Yeah, that's great. And so I kind of have two questions. One is maybe around the biggest challenges for dynamic yield in the market. In my mind, that would be potentially around kind of these data and data protections, where I think we've seen some things like the GDPR and stuff in Europe, and then some of the stuff that's happening in like the US now. Japan hasn't really had like a government officiated type enforced law or anything, but it does seem like there is more of a hesitance or fear around data being used in ways that maybe people haven't signed off on, and this maybe goes into disrupting that harmony. What have you seen as the biggest challenges? Like, does that play into how you approach clients, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Japan, maybe to give more context to the wider audience who might see this and listen to this, Japan has a very strong history of wanting to maintain privacy in the digital world. So early on, it was said that for social media, Facebook would never succeed in Japan because the Facebook of Japan was Mixi, this social network that allowed you to use handle names instead of your real name, and you didn't have to use your own photos. That changed a little bit with Facebook. And do you know what the tipping point for Facebook was, by the way?
No, I don't.
It was the Hollywood movie,
The Social Network.
Social Network, based on Facebook, that humanized the platform. And I think it told a narrative that people could relate to a little bit better. So
that's one of my favorite movies. Yeah,
it's Aaron Sorkin. He does a good job.
Yeah,
Very
exactly.
good storyteller.
Dialogue.
I don't think very much of that movie was true to the source
material.
Yeah, but it did sort of humanize the concept of Facebook, and then it reached a point where people started to adopt it. I remember during about a 2-month period, all of a sudden my Facebook friends went from like maybe 5% Japanese to like 70% Japanese, because everybody was friending me and joining this platform, and it happened quite quickly. But at the same time, even now, if you look at a lot of your friends' Facebook profiles, you won't see many photos of themselves. A lot of food photos, a lot of photos of pets. If it's a photo of them, it's usually at a weird angle and kind of blocked out by stuff, or they're in a Pikachu costume. And that's because people do really want to protect their privacy, which I think is a good idea. You should not necessarily be personally identifiable in your social media if you can avoid it, other than maybe your LinkedIn profile for work purposes, or if you're using your Facebook profile in lieu of LinkedIn, like most people in Japan do. Now, you mentioned that there isn't really legislation in Japan about that. It hasn't been released, but it's in the works. So I've done some research and tried to understand what's coming up in terms of Japan's data protection legislation. It's pretty much modeled on GDPR, so it's pretty close to that. But it's also kind of, in some ways, a non-issue for us, because in that example that we talked about earlier, like going into Main Street and the shopkeeper knowing your name and everything, in our world, it's like you go into the shop and the shopkeeper is blind, but he knows who you are, and he knows many things about you. He knows what your audience segment is, but he doesn't actually know who you are. He wouldn't be able to see you on the street and say, oh, that's Brian. So we are kind of blind in that respect, in that we're not gathering any personally identifiable information whatsoever. We just understand what your audience segment is. So it actually hasn't come up. None of our customers so far have said, is it going to be an issue with gathering users' information? And when we explain how the technology works and the type of data that we're gathering, it's just not a concern, because it's clear that the data we get gives that audience segment a better user experience.
So I want to ask about the McDonald's use case. I think that we've talked a little bit before. I know that they made a large investment, or potentially are the primary investor in dynamic yield. So anything you can talk about there, anything you can share would be great.
Sure, yeah, it's a very interesting story. So McDonald's was previously one of our largest customers. And the use case was fascinating in that it's more or less completely offline. It wasn't the website, it wasn't their app. It was actually the touch panels that they use in the drive-thru. So the original use case was, if somebody comes to the drive-thru and our software has identified that it's a hot day, rather than making them cycle through every single menu item and go through maybe a 20-touch process while cars are piling up behind them at the drive-thru, we understand it's a hot day, so we'll recommend an iced coffee. So when they purchase their Big Mac, let's show iced coffee as like the first drink option. And then as a side menu, let's maybe show ice cream, soft cream, right? Or a McFlurry, something like that. So we've reduced the number of decisions they have to make, because we've said, hot day, you're likely to want this. Cold day, the reverse of that. Or, we can understand things like, in this particular area, in this geography, maybe it's an urban area and it's the morning and 90% of customers are purchasing something that they can eat quickly on their way to work. Let's recommend that. Intuitively, we know what's going to work for certain locations at certain times. Maybe 3 p.m. in a residential area, we can expect that people are coming through after school, and there are certain items we can recommend for that. So based on pretty intuitive logic, we can make cross-sell and upsell recommendations. So that use case, that initial use case, was very successful. So successful that McDonald's said, well, we want this technology, we want to make it available for all of our locations around the world, so we'll just buy this company. And so they acquired Dynamic Yield, and then not spun it out, but we are an independent subsidiary. So they said, we want this technology for our drive-thrus, not for any other fast food, so we can't sell to Burger King, but we can take our technology and provide it to the rest of the market. So it's very interesting because they were already an outlier. We didn't really have any other fast food customers, and most of our clients were in fashion and e-commerce and luxury brands, a little bit of finance and insurance and travel and some other verticals. And now we're free to continue servicing that market, but we have the backing of this parent organization, which has given us a great deal of stability. We've been able to keep growing our team despite all of the uncertainty caused by the coronavirus. So we're still hiring. We're hiring right now for this team here in Tokyo. And we've seen stability while a lot of our competitors have gone through acquisitions and mergers and having to lay off some of their staff. So it's been a real win-win situation. And I think it sets the template in many ways. It sets the tone for digital transformation moving forward across what would normally seem like a truly, purely brick and mortar industry. It's unlikely that anybody would see McDonald's as an e-commerce company, but the truth is today they are a data-driven organization. They are in some ways an AI-enabled organization. And I believe that that's the future of many businesses. The applications of this type of technology, in some ways, the sky's the limit. If you can if you can conceive of it, you can probably apply it at some point in the future. So we're going to see this applied to many very traditional industries that I think will help them move forward into this more digitally enabled age, which is going to be very exciting.
Yeah, I think that is really exciting. I think even just thinking about the possibilities around a tool like this, and you mentioned some of them before too, like taking it offline, I think, or everything's online, so not really taking it offline, but expanding that online. And yeah, like the IoT possibilities, everything is super exciting. I also know that Dynamic Yield is an Israeli company. How is the Israeli culture compared to maybe other work cultures, or if anything you can talk about there? That'd be great.
Yeah, it's fun. it's dynamic and it's exciting. I think it's an interesting phenomenon. You mentioned this yourself. You've seen a lot of your clients now coming into the Japanese market are Israeli companies. Many of them Israeli startups, software startups. I think that Israel has become recognized internationally as this like powerhouse of startup technology companies. I think there are many reasons for that, but one of them is a great education system, sort of a very sort of condensed ecosystem that gives people a great foundation in this type of technology, and then enables them to spin that out into society in a way that really backs people in the early stages. So we're seeing a wide range, really quite a wide variety of verticals that are creating really forward-thinking technology. And Japan has really adopted working closely with Israel. It's a real shame about the coronavirus stopping this, but the Israeli-Japan trade organization had done a lot of work over the past few years to increase the relationship between Japan and Israel. And the first direct flight between Tokyo and Tel Aviv was starting this year. Now, obviously, that's been put on pause, but it would have been really nice because we would have been able to fly direct to Tel Aviv from here, and I think it would have increased the flow of business even more. But we've moved to this digital flow. And for a company like Dynamic Yield, it doesn't stop us from doing business in any way. But it's really exciting because Japan has embraced this culture that is very different from its own. Japan is all about no risk, harmony. No Japanese manager ever wants to make a poor decision because they'll get a little black mark next to their name and they won't advance in their career. And Israel is much more dynamic and moving forward much more quickly and much more able to accept risk, because I think people are sort of accustomed to risk even in their daily life. There's a certain level of risk just in that geography. But somehow there's been this balance of Japanese and Israeli companies working together very well. I think part of it is because the Israeli companies have realized that the Japanese market is huge. There's massive potential, and if you can be patient and build the necessary relationships, that you can be very successful in this market. And I think a lot of it is also because there have been some good sort of bridge companies who have come in, some agencies who've specialized in working with Israeli technology, and then a lot of advisors and people associated with the different trade organizations and consulting firms and so on, who've come in to create this necessary bridge between the cultures, in some cases even a buffer between the cultures. It's a big part of my job. And I would give this as career advice to anybody who's considering this type of business development, sales, or country manager type position between Japan and Israel. I would say expect to be a buffer between the cultures. I will come out of a meeting on the Japanese side sometimes, and I cannot give that decision as it is to HQ in Tel Aviv, because they simply won't understand it. because most of the time I'll come out of a meeting and the answer will be a non-answer. and you have to add all of this context in order for it to even make sense. Like so what's the decision here? What are they saying? You know, what is the ask? What do they want? Whereas on the other side, the Israeli team tends to be so direct, so concise, and so clear that I literally cannot take that to the Japanese team either. Right? You have to be a buffer, and you have to sort of sometimes soften things a little bit. Sometimes it's simple things like we're very concerned about the UI because one character looks slightly out of place, and now we can't use the product. And the Israeli attitude to that would be, we'll fix it in the next release. Just why do you care about this? So we can't take that level of sort of pickiness and correctly convey it without a lot of extra context. And then we can't take that level of let's just move forward without being able to add the context of there's underlying empathy there. It's not that they don't care. So you have to constantly be this bridge of communication and this buffer, because if it were one-to-one communication, I think most Japanese companies would not be able to work with most Israeli companies directly. It's too different. The culture is black and white different in many cases. But with a little bit of a buffer in between, a little bit of a bridge in between, there's beautiful synergy that can be created there with these two very different sort of partners. Before we started recording, you and I were actually talking about that in the context of our personal lives, where if you're married to somebody, or if you're in a partnership with somebody, do you want to be married to your exact clone? No, that's not interesting, right? You want a partner who complements your strengths and weaknesses. So I think that's what's happening between Japan and Israel. There's this beautiful synergy. There's a great partnership that's happening there, just with the support of a good ecosystem around it.
Nice. Yeah, I think most of my clients now, especially in advertising in this kind of MarTech landscape, are either rooted in Israel or started there and then launched in the States, but then HQ is still in Israel. Nice. I think we've covered a lot about dynamic yield as a product, as personalization, kind of what it can do in this market. Do you have anything else you'd want to talk about around that particular product, things you guys are working on, kind of future innovations? Yeah.
Well, I would like to give a word of encouragement to the workforce in Japan, and then a little bit of an appeal to the workforce in Japan. I would say that for the next 15 to 20 years, as we've been talking about through the course of this discussion, understanding web technology, front-end technology, these sort of intangibles, and the application of digital to our daily lives is the future. It is necessary, and we have a responsibility to learn this and to educate ourselves in this direction. Anybody who does is going to future-proof their career and create a very rewarding career that will solve major societal issues, will solve it first here in Japan, and then by becoming experts in how to apply AI and this type of technology to the societal issues that Japan is facing, you'll then be able to take that globally. So I think sometimes Japan's current generation of young workers doesn't understand the huge potential, the opportunities that they have. By solving some of the problems that Japan faces right now, we can then solve these problems on a global scale, because this is what we're going to face for the next 20 to even 50 years. An aging population, a declining population, and the need to increase this type of productivity. At the same time, I would really encourage people to look at the work-life balance that this type of digital technology is bringing as well. We are now able, as fully as you and I, as people who are fully able to work as digital natives, right? We're able to do almost all of our work in this new digital world. It's comfortable. We get to do the work in the way that best suits our lifestyle. Again, we were talking about some family issues before we started recording, where we are beneficiaries really of this new working lifestyle caused by the whole coronavirus thing. And I think for Japan, it's causing some great societal changes. A much better work-life balance is coming. Less time spent on crowded trains, less time, doing very manual, inefficient work processes, so your workday can get shorter. Productivity through the enablement of this type of technology is, it just has so many applications for improving overall society. And that is the goal of this Society 5.0 initiative. Let's find a more harmonious society where our work is more efficient and we have more time with our friends and our family, and there's less environmental impact. We're ideally using less energy because we're not on the train all the time back and forth, and maybe we don't need as large an office and we can scale things down a little bit. So it's exciting. Essentially, the message that I want to give is that the future is exciting, and today's workforce should be excited about these opportunities, even during these kind of dark times of a pandemic. Anytime there's change like this, there's opportunity. So yeah, be excited, be positive, be enthusiastic for the future.
And learn AI and machine learning. Those are the two main things.
Yes, and core digital competency. Become a digital native as much as possible, because it's coming to all aspects of our lives, from automotive to manufacturing to how we interact with friends and everything.
Yeah, especially now. I guess, thank you so much, Evan, for your time. There is one other topic. I don't know if we have time, but as far as like COVID, this whole pandemic, what has been the impact for you guys at Dynamic Yield? Like, have you seen an increase in your interest? Have you shifted how you guys are doing things?
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit earlier in the discussion, but we are what could be called a COVID beneficiary.
Yes.
Of course, empathetically, naturally, it's a horrible time that's very difficult for many people, and we need to be cognizant of that. But at the same time, we have a responsibility as a business to take advantage of a business opportunity so that we can provide value to our members and our customers and society at large. And this is an opportunity because so many of our customers are not able to continue business in brick and mortar the way they used to. They have to move into the online world, and many of them, they're quite new to it. So one of our greatest value adds, in addition to the software itself, the technology itself, is the fact that we have hundreds of customers all over the world who've been using the software for years and sharing with us how they're using it, asking us to improve it in certain areas so they can do certain things better. That knowledge base of how to be successful in e-commerce and the digital world is just such a huge, powerful tool. Anybody who uses our platform benefits from all of these use cases and the practical applications of the software. In fact, we've opened up the platform completely to share all of these use cases. So if you go to the website, we have the inspiration library, where you can get literally inspiration about how people are being successful with experience optimization and personalization. We also have completely opened up our learning center. So anybody can go to the website and learn everything from recommendation algorithms to personalization strategies, methodologies, how to set up your team for success, how to run A/B tests. Everything is completely open, and if you go and take that learning course, you can get a certificate, just like you could for Google Analytics, and that will help your career, I think, to be certified on platforms like this. So it's as a company, we are a COVID beneficiary. The company is growing. Our customers are seeing success with the platform. We're helping them through this difficult time by allowing them to increase their revenue. Many of our customers are seeing some of the biggest quarters that they've ever had, in addition to, by using the software, in addition to all of the learnings that we have about how to best run these type of experience optimization programs. So it's overall, it's a very good thing for the company. And then at a personal level, we already had a large percentage of our workforce that was working from home, able to, telework. Much of our sales team, for example, had already been working on Zoom. For a time, for 2 or 3 weeks during the initial series of country lockdowns, I think almost the entire organization, like 98% or something of the company, were all working from home with no interruption to the business, no major disruption to the business. We've now started to move back into a model where if you prefer working in the office, you can. I personally find it very productive to be in the office, and I quite like coming in, so I'm here 3-4 days a week. Many people in headquarters in Tel Aviv are now back in the office, about that same amount, and New York as well. So we're now moving into this sort of hybrid model where if it works better for you to be in the office, you can, and if it works better for you to be at home, you can. And then we're shifting as various regional decisions are made, whether people should be working from home or not. Overall, though, we were very fortunate because we were already a digitally native company, and we were able to weather risks like this. So that's part of the message that I'd like to give to the Japanese market. I think for a long time, Japan resisted digital transformation because digital transformation itself was seen as risky, which I think, this is just my own hypothesis, but I think this comes from the tradition of living in a country where the next natural disaster is coming next month.
Yeah.
Like there's always something. There's a typhoon or an earthquake or a resulting tsunami or some weird thing is going to come constantly, and it always has throughout Japan's history. There's always been massive disruption. So I think business has been sort of formulated to be very resistant to that kind of disruption. And I think it's one reason why the old analog ways of doing business, paper-based workflows and so on, are so highly trusted. Paper itself doesn't seem like it would survive a lot of these natural disasters, but the way it's done in very, very well reinforced concrete offices and row upon row of folders and everything, I guess it is pretty disaster resistant. Whereas I think even at the government level on down, there's always been this image that these intangible, this digital world can all disappear. Mm-hmm. But that's not actually the case in today's cloud-enabled environment. It's not that a single data center would go down and you'd lose everything because it's reproduced in multiple data centers in multiple geographic areas. In the old model, you had to have all of your tax filings, all major paperwork had to be kept for 7 years in physical format for every business. So you had all this paperwork piling up. In the modern world, now in the digital world rather, that one office or that one distribution center or whatever, it could all be wiped out in a flood or fire or something. But in the modern world, a single data center, if it's wiped out, you've got backups of it. So it's actually much safer. It's much less risky. Moving into this intangible world, even though you can't touch it and go and look at that paper, you have backups of it, so it's a lot safer. So I think when Japan starts to realize that it's less risk to be digitally native like this, then that transformation will be a lot easier. And this pandemic has highlighted it, right?
Definitely. Yeah, it's definitely changed the time a lot. Right on, Evan. Well, I definitely appreciate your time. It's great talking to you. And I think that we're working on something that'll be coming out right as this releases. So hopefully we can highlight a little bit more specificity within the dynamic yield product and things that you're looking for.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks very much, Brian. It's been really enjoyable to have this chat, and thanks for the opportunity. And again, if anybody is interested, we are hiring right now for a solutions engineer for the team here in Tokyo. So it's a great place to work, and we're very happy if somebody would come and join us here. So.